Okay, so that's the sort of fieldwork related research I just wanted to present there. What I'm going to do now is to talk about the more sort of structural, more sort of formalised responses to drug-related that occurs in the UK. And I emphasise the UK because I'm not familiar with the strategies and so on in Ireland. But first of all, can I just have a show of hands if anyone's heard of a report called Tackling Drug-Related? Excellent, brilliant. Okay. So, to move on to the official responses by the UK government. I've also got to talk about local responses that I've noted across the south of England, and also to provide some coordination responses. Sorry, I lost track a little bit there because I was referring to this document. And it's actually quite remarkable how many people in the UK, in England and Wales especially, are not familiar with this document. This, in my opinion, is the most understated document, drug-related, government-based, government-recommended document that people just don't know about it. And I'm not a supporter of any government really. This is one of the most eye-opening reports I've ever read about drugs, and it can be summarised in this one page. There are 14 recommendations on how local authorities should effectively manage drug-related. I'm not going to talk about every one of these recommendations.
I presume we'll be getting this, won't we? We'll get your presentation.
What I'll do is I'll arrange that to give you something. But the nature of that 40-page document is essentially an emphasis upon a coordinated, multi-agency partnership that addresses not only drug-related liquor, but street-based injecting. Within the report, we talk about monitoring systems set up by multi-agency partnerships and establishing centralised systems of liquor collection and monitoring sites for public injecting. They talk about the way in which the police can work more proactively within these partnerships, and the way in which needle and syringe programs may play a more effective role in addressing litter. As well as that, they also, in a way, repeat in a more watered down, more neutral way the concerns expressed in media reports. So for example, I talk about don't encourage the public to handle, don't encourage the public to touch, and that bottom line, always assume that everything is infected being from that report. So there are 14 recommendations within that DEFRA report. Sorry, DEFRA is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Hardly public health, hardly the Department of Health. It's come from an environmentally based agency, which again, I think is very important. So the three key recommendations that I'd like to focus on from that report are from the top. Plans for managing drug-related litter should, and that's my emphasis, should include close liaison with those responsible for the design, maintenance and management of public toilets. 2. Partnerships should fully explore the potential for sharp spins, liaising closely with drug users and services to ensure the siting and promotion of sharp spins is as effective as possible. The third point, I mentioned earlier that where the blue lights aren't necessarily an issue in Ireland, but in the UK, this report in 2005, it's a 8-year-old report now, in 2005 they stated, due to the increased risks to users and the lack of evidence as to its efficiency, blue light should not be used in public toilets to deter drug use. That's all pretty clear, pretty definitive, and all pretty reasonable and rational recommendations. Okay, so let's look at the first point that report mentions, the issue of management and design of public toilets. In the DEFRA report, they talk about an initiative in Cambridge, and that initiative is this, but this particular toilet is not in Cambridge. So this is a model that copies it. It's the same manufacturer of toilets. Okay. So what you've got is a standalone set of toilets, which is available for men and women, children alike to use as a single cubicle. Open the door and you walk into this type of room. You've got all the requirements that you need for toilets and sanitation, but look at this little box in the top left of that corner. You've got a sort of series of images about needles, syringes, razor blades, safety pins, sharps, essentially, sharps that you might use in a toilet, having shaved, changing babies, now injecting drugs. Underneath that, you've got the working area of the toilet, and that's for the plumber, that's for the toilet attendants to take care of the litter that's discarded in this birdhouse, bird hole type deposit area. And that falls down a chute into the drug-related litter bin. And this is located directly behind each and every one of the cubicles. And this received immense praise and commendation in the DEFRA report, a toilet design such as this. This is regarded as the gold standard in public toilet design. That's my words, not DEFRA. But actually, this, remember what I said about the drug user in the Premier League? Then this must be the Champions League or the Championship or whatever. Because this is a well-designed toilet unit that takes into consideration the issue of drug-related litter. Other designs that I've come across throughout the UK, from the top left there, pretty similar depositing box in the toilet compared to the one in the centre, which is sort of loosely held onto a wall with a, what's it called, a wire of some description. Following on to the large box in the suitcase setting. To advise, please contact the attendant for assistance in disposal of hypodermic needles. To this, a shelves box attached to a fence with cable ties. Not surprisingly. Oh yeah, and there's a little sign there saying do not remove. A couple of days later I noticed it was back in the field and it was split open and it was all over the bushes. To this one, which was an improvised 5-litre container, I think, which had been placed in the restroom cabin of car park attendants. So they improvised to remove the protective clips and seals and left an open box with the bacterial soup inside. So, because the DEFRA report, in 2005, talked specifically about drug-related litter bins within public places, public toilets, what I did as part of my research from 2006 onwards was to look at the issue of litter bins in public places, public toilets. And one publication that comes from that is this one here, which is a comparative study of 2 different forms of drug-related litter bin in 2 different places. So the first litter bin is this steel box construction. Now, this was a proactive response by that particular local authority to street-based injecting. And there were several of these installations placed throughout the city. They were well advertised, from dealing with syringe provisions from local chemists. The leaflet was, and the map was included in the Sharps pack that was available from And the device itself was portable. It was actually screwed into the concrete, so it could be moved to another place, another area of the city. But attached to this were various official concerns that it was, people would be worried about the effect it would have on tourism. So people would think that this type of thing would impact on people's perceptions of that particular place. People would think this city has a problem with drugs. From a drug user perspective, moving down the line to the red areas, they considered these bins to be too public. Remember what I was saying about they're not public exhibitionists, they don't want to reveal a drug user identity by putting shops in public places such as this. Likewise, they commented, I think you can see there, there's absolutely no signage, no indication as to what that bin actually is. Similarly, drug users state, well, these bins, very good idea, but they're not in sites where people inject drugs because they were actually located well away from, let's call them, public injecting sites. So the idea being that they would inject in a toilet and then walk 10 minutes down the road to deposit that. Chewing gum, cigarette butts, dog mess, I'm not going to pick it up and walk 10 minutes. It's the same, exactly the same situation, people's attitudes towards litter, but in the context of drug-related litter. And in some cases, many of these bins, by many of the drug users in that particular place, did not actually recognise these as sharps bins. And I don't blame them. One guy said, I thought that was an electricity meter. But you see, you can understand why. The other, the gold standard design, as you can see, there are a lot more green features on this, on the text on the right there. Again, these toilets were seen as a proactive response by that particular authority, by that particular drug and alcohol action team, to street-based injecting, to drug-related litter. These toilets are also in central locations, in central shopping districts. The design features, I think, are fantastic, because if you look at them carefully, you can see that there are no ledges, nothing you can put a syringe barrel on top, nothing that you can stash or discard. There are no surfaces on which things can slide around. And that is a deliberate design by the manufacturer, thinking of that, because in the more conventional toilets, toilet attendants are convinced that when people put syringes on the top of the door frame or behind a particular ledge, they are convinced that people, or within the roll of toilet paper, people are convinced that these are strategies designed to deliberately harm people that work there. My argument is no, they're not. These are strategies to discard what a drug user would consider a safe way of getting rid of equipment to facilitate a more rapid exit from that particular place. So they're using that little environment to get rid of all the equipment that would incriminate them in that practice. Admittedly, not recognising the harm that it could cause to other people, but nevertheless, it's not malicious discarding from my opinion. So this design was supported by workers because it removed that particular aspect of drug related. And likewise, it was supported by drug users. And because of that, these bins were used on a regular basis and regularly full of used equipment and unused equipment. And because of that, there were fewer exposed shops around those particular community centres. But the yellow amber indicator there, from a drug user perspective, they assumed that toilets such as this provided a license, an informal license, for them to inject in this particular place. It was seen as a, they're providing this, they're catering for injecting now by providing this space. So because of that, there was some caution. And some drug users did not want to use it because they thought it was like part of a honey trap. People would go there and be arrested. And with some credibility, because there was, evidence of increased police activity around these particular toilets. People were noted as being arrested. Some interviews did describe police knocking on doors to arrest drug users. So, this is the challenge. These toilets are not constructed for the purposes of facilitating or providing a license for injecting drug users. What these toilets are constructed for is providing spatial opportunities for people to discard injecting equipment, whether used or unused, because of the potential for sharp springs to ensure the siting of promotional bins is as effective as possible. Now, that sounds very complicated because it seems almost contradictory. But actually, what the DEFRA report is suggesting is basically what I was saying before, about concealment, about not revealing the drug user identity. It's about not displaying who you are, what you are. If you want to get rid of equipment, the most discreet location to do it is a toilet, and a bin within that toilet. So the DEFRA aren't actually recommending public toilets as injecting sites, and I am not advocating that. What I am advocating is that toilets should be designed more effectively to include opportunities for discarding drug-related litter. Clearly, people who want to inject in a public toilet because of the harm reduction facilities they provide, lights, water, safe space, access, then yes, as with any act of intimacy within a toilet, then yeah, you can't take that away, it will happen. But at the same time, from a drug-related litter point of view, they do provide opportunities to discard it in there, where it's acceptable for public health management. Okay, so in that comparative study of drug-related litter bins in 2 seconds, the sort of key findings from that were that the spatial management of injecting environments of drug-related litter sites is essentially vital to the success of the particular projects. Also, the need to explain why there's a toilet with a litter bin suddenly appeared in the community, that has to be explained to the community. Because it will cause some controversy, there will be objection, people will possibly take offence to it. As well as that, I also suggested that needle and syringe programmes should take an active part within this, explaining why we're doing this and why they're not in the public place. Similarly, all of these types of interventions, drug-related litter bins especially, need to be culturally, environmentally, spatially, and geographically relevant to the lives of the injecting drug users, to be relevant to that injecting experience in a street-based setting. The reason why I say culturally, environmentally, spatially, and geographically is to make these types of interventions meaningful, to have meaningful benefit. It will reduce needle stick injury in community settings in order to maximise impact in terms of improved community safety, as well as related outcomes such as service uptake by users, accessing needles and syringes, for example, as well as promoting safe discarding strategies and the safe use of needles and syringes. So, the blue light issue. I'm just going to quickly go through this because it is an issue that I think is important, although maybe not necessarily as relevant in Ireland as it is in the UK. So, DEFRA, they state, 2005, due to increasing lack of evidence to its efficiency, blue lighting should not be used in public toilets to deter drug use. So in 2010, I produced the first, what I believe to be the first, evaluation of blue lights in public toilets. And from that paper was based on work in Plymouth. And on the top there, 18 of 31 injected drug users had injected in blue light toilets. And it was, remember the injecting career I was talking about at the beginning, in which longer injecting careers reflected more potential for street-based injecting. Well, it was those, that injecting experience that influenced using ultra-blue light. A novice injector would be prevented from accessing these toilets, but the more experienced injectors would be less. And that was because the more experienced injector can base their injecting on touch rather than sight. So they don't necessarily need the light to see what they do, particularly amongst groin injectors. And then because of that, people who go to a blue light area can specifically inject into the groin, into the neck, or have a peer attend with them and inject in those particular places or find spots on their arms. A couple of years later, this was reconfirmed in Southend, in which 11 of 20, making a total of 29 out of 51, who had injected in a blue light environment. So that's more than 50% of public injectors have experience of using in a blue light area and claiming to be proficient in using in a blue light environment. But in addition to that, the blue lights also affect elderly people, those who are infirm or have eye problems. And also, if you see a blue light environment, people typically somehow like litter bins associated with a drug-related issue. Oh, this toilet has a drug-related issue. Okay, so I think you can see some kind of statutory contradiction there. They want to put blue lights into an area and thus indicate an area with problem with drugs. Yet they're reluctant to install a drug-related litter bin because they don't want to advertise that particular area as a problem with drugs. So it's the same issue, it's different responses. And it's all about structural responses to spatial management of public space. So just to emphasise blue light injecting experiences, these are two comments made by drug users in two different settings who state you can still inject in blue light toilets if someone's got good veins, like fat veins on their arms. You can do it. Whereas for me, down there, okay, I don't need to see it. Obviously, I know where I'm going, so I can do it blindfolded if I have to, no problem. Likewise, because they've got blue lighting, they say you can't pick up, well you can, because you can see the initial rush into the needle, and now he's talking about the blood colour changing in the bowel. That's what they've got them for, isn't it? To deter. The lights make it more difficult, but you can do it fine. So he's accepting that it makes the injecting episode more arduous, which is what they're designed to do. But because of his experience and the other guys' experience and all of this, they can still do it because it's all based on touch. And essentially, from a variety of perspectives, blue lights pose a number of challenges. First and foremost, the public health challenge is to convince others that blue lights actually initiate harmful practice amongst experienced injectors. So you're talking about people who are willingly going there to inject in the groin, which as we know is harmful practice. And they don't necessarily, well, there's no evidence whatsoever. I've never seen any evidence to demonstrate that blue lights are an effective intervention. They might prevent, yes, they might prevent novice injectors from going there, but where's the evidence to show that he's likely not? And the harm reduction challenge, from a harm reduction perspective, is to convince those drug users that do go there that, look, come on, you're putting yourself into a dangerous place, literally a dangerous place, when you inject there. A challenge for the local authority is to convince the public of the harms associated with blue lights, and I accept that local authorities may be putting blue lights there as a sort of as a mechanism to be seen to be doing something about a particular condition, but come on, give me the evidence to convince the public subsequently that it is an effective intervention. And as I said before, there's that contradiction between bins and blue lights, revealing places of drug use, but the contradiction and the different perspectives on it. And again, as I said, public toilets should be public toilets. It's not about challenging space designed for particular people to attend or not to attend. So, moving on to the suggested harm reduction framework for a more harm reduction focused station management. In the absence of safer injecting facilities, drug consumption rooms, all authorities in the UK and presumably here have to work with the types of intervention, the types of environments that we can legally and legitimately operate within. So very simply, I would say, consider the 14 recommendations as a basic fundamental starting point for any coordinated response to drug-related litter. Within that, read with interest of the way in which agencies can work together to monitor and control individual sites, and the way in which drug-related litter is recorded by practitioners and reach services and so on. Consider the introduction and scaling up of drug-related litter bins, with the caveat that these are explained fully and appropriately by the relevant services. Review blue light installations, maybe not so relevant. Needles and syringe programs to be proactive in collaborative work regarding anything to do with needles, syringes and associated paraphernalia. So by that, point, what I'm thinking of here is some of the recommendations that we made previously include hospital policies regarding access to injecting paraphernalia within that hospital. In some settings, to be seen to be having any form of injecting equipment results in immediate eviction. No questions asked, how do you go? Is it possible that these policies could be reviewed? Similarly, could needle and syringe programs take a more proactive role in the way in which equipment is distributed? Now, I'm not talking, definitely not talking about a one-for-one policy. What I'm talking about here is having the option to have one set of works if required. In each of these settings where I've previously worked, it's usually been the case that you go to a community pharmacy, you go to a needle and syringe program, you get 10. You get a pack of 10 with 10 of everything. 10 needles, 10 syringes, 10 spoons, 10 fills. How about making it so it's one item, one syringe, one needle, one cooker, one filter, to reflect the needs of a homeless, street-based injector. They don't want to be carrying excess equipment, so maybe they need, just for that one hit. Yes, I know, actually by looking on people's faces, yes, there are concerns here about, well, what about the need for another set of equipment? Yes, well, as I've said, how about syringe dispenser machines? There's another option that can be considered, such as France, Germany, I believe has them, and also parts of Canada. Okay, and then assertive peer outreach with drug agencies. Here, I mean, I realise in terms of austerity cuts, there's a need for people to be very clear and precise as to the type of outreach they can and are able to do. But how about maybe working with user groups. Is there some kind of outreach that could involve a street-based, what Tom was saying earlier about using mobile phones as a point of contact for not only distributing equipment, but I hate to say it, but also taking part in the collection of it. And in the past, previous conversations with practitioners and colleagues have suggested that type of suggestion is somehow discriminatory and somehow prejudicial towards drug users to be seen taking part in clearing up other people's mess. Well, okay, but if you're going to apply that rationale, what about the thousands of guys and women who take part in clearing up other people's rubbish, clearing up other people's chewing room, cigarette butts, dog mess? What are we saying about those people? Likewise, is it possible that a coordinated response could take part in recording where drug-related litter sites occur? These are obviously connected to public injecting themselves, so could there be some kind of, because of that, figures that are collected on a regular basis, it establishes a database of where and when, possibly who, are injecting in particular places. This directs intervention, street-based intervention, if it's used appropriately, not fed to the police for policing purposes, but fed to the appropriate agencies for public health purposes. That relates to the next point, how are public sites policed by police? Is it possible that instead of arresting people for possession and so on, is it possible that they could then be coordinated towards harm reduction services or treatment services rather than the immediate arrest on site? And that relates to the next point. As well as that, I would also advocate a challenge to all media reports of drug-related litter. Remember that point earlier, specifically in court. I always like to see that type of thing because I like to challenge it. It's the nature of sociology, I suppose. And what I have got is a template of a letter to be sent from a harm reduction perspective to reporters to report this type of story. I don't have it with us, but I'm not very willing to share that with you. Maybe that could be arranged to Tim. But the nature of that challenge is to basically keep calm, challenge the stereotypes that may feature within that particular news story, challenge the stigma that's associated with stories that you saw earlier, and always provide evidence to back up your case. My evidence in challenging these types of stories is the final point of this presentation, and it is to rationalise the threat, in inverted commas, of drug-related litter. So the text on the left there, that's from that paper about drug-related litter bins, in which various previous researchers looked and analysed and done tests on various equipment that's been described in this week, and concludes that the rate of infection from discarded equipment, used equipment, would be 12 to 31%. So that's 1 in every 12 in every 100 to 31 of every 100. Needless to injury could result in hepatitis B. For hepatitis C, that falls to just over 1.5%, and it's less than 1% for HIV. So actually, that final sentence there, as such, and from an epidemiological perspective, there is perhaps only limited rationality and fear associated with virally contaminated rooms and syringes in community settings. The more simplistic way of saying is that the threat of infection from discarded equipment is actually very low. I'm not saying that there's no risk, I'm saying there is very, very low risk of infection. Likewise, I'm all too familiar with the needle stick injury associated with drug-related. I'm aware, as a result of conversations with people who have had this in the workplace, of the stress, the anxiety, the strain this can put on family relationships, the assumption that people can't have sex because they've been stuck with a needle, the need for blood testing for HIV, the HIV as well. And also, because of these tensions, I believe that there should also be some form of statutory training for people who are working in environments which people might be injecting drugs, in which training, awareness and assistance is provided regarding hepatitis. As well as that, people should be given reassurance of the low risk, points that I was making earlier. There's an illustration of that. Several people that I spoke to assumed that because they'd had vaccinations for hepatitis B, they assumed that covered them for a big answer. Likewise, there was the assumption that, which is partly true, that the various viruses will not stay active outside a bloodborne environment for a certain period of time. And there is truth in that, but also hepatitis can stay much more active for longer periods of time, as I'm sure you're aware, than HIV. But the message is, for those people working in drug-related environments, drug-using environments, in the event of needle stick injury, the message that needs to be emphasised to those people, as well as to the general public: keep calm, don't panic. And just to conclude, I'm going to, probably from an unconventional source, because it's not a statutory body, it's more of it's the Global Policy Commission. I don't know if you've heard of this group, but this is, the purpose of this group is to bring, to the international level, an informed, science-based discussion about humane and effective ways to reduce harm caused by drugs to people and societies. Essentially, it's a collection of prominent business people, former bankers. Richard Branson's involved in this particular group. And the idea is that they are an objective group who provide comments on particular policy. And one of their conclusions is that drug policies, and that would include management of public space, must be based on human rights and public health principles. Related to that, we should end the stigmatisation and marginalisation of people who use certain drugs, injecting in public places. And very finally, the 4 take-home messages that I would like you to leave this with is that, again, referring back to those 3 key points from that DEFRA report regarding these bins in public places, the potential for more effective management of public space and toilets themselves, blue lights, and also keep calm, don't panic, and provide evidence-based responses are the best. Thank you very much.